Good morning, everybody. We will start the first part of today's presentation. First, it will be Journal Club, appraisal of a trial. Today's presentation by Dr. Angela Vijayaratne, Senior Registrar in Rheumatology and Rehabilitation at Rehabilitation Hospital, Ragama. Go to Angela to start off part of today's clinical program.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, sir. Good morning, madam, and my dear colleagues. Today, my topic for the presentation is the therapies for active rheumatoid arthritis after methotrexate failure, which was described in the RACAT trial. So it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013. The conclusions of the study was the triple therapy with sulfasalazine and Conclusion of the trials were triple therapy with sulfasalazine and hydroxychloroquine added to methotrexate was non-inferior to etanercept plus methotrexate in patients with rheumatoid arthritis who had active disease despite methotrexate therapy. And the strategy of first administering the triple therapy with the switch to biologics in patients who do not have an adequate response to triple therapy will be a cost-effective way of in treating the patients, also without affecting any clinical outcomes. And with regard to why I selected this whole trial, which was conducted from July 2007 to December 2010, which was published in 2013, it's compare the triple therapy with the biologics. For a country like us, which is a low middle income country, the cost effectiveness and the free availability and the safety of the triple therapies more than the biologics. So I thought of analyzing this trial, whether we can take the conclusion to our practice. So can we have the faith in the conclusion of this trial? So assess that, I have identified several issues I have to consider to assess the conclusions. First, are the results of the study valid? What are the results? And will the results help locally? For the question of are the results of the study valid, the results deals with the internal validity or the accuracy of the results, and it will represent whether the treatment effect have been, whether it's an unbiased estimate or whether it has been influenced by a systematic fashion to lead to a false conclusion. To assess that, I'm going to ask several questions. The first one is, did the trial address a clearly focused issue? Was the assignment of patients to treatment randomized? And were patients, healthcare workers, and the study personnel blinded? And were the groups similar at the start of the trial? Aside from the experimental intervention, were the groups treated equally? And were all the patients who entered the trial properly accounted for its conclusion? For the background of this study, the methotrexate, as we all know, is an excellent economical first-line DMARD used to treat majority of patients with rheumatoid arthritis. Most patients respond well to methotrexate, though many continue to have active disease only with the methotrexate. So, understanding how to best treat patients with rheumatoid arthritis with active disease despite methotrexate therapy is critically important. There are a number of therapies with different economic implications which are shown to be effective when added to methotrexate, but no trials have directly compared those active therapies. So the above mentioned trial is to compare the two regimens which have proven efficacy when added to methotrexate therapy. Namely, the first one is hydroxychloroquine and sulfasalazine. The other one is the biologic. They have assessed the tumor necrosis factor inhibitor etanercept. And the first question, did the trial address a clearly focused issue? They have evaluated the two treatment strategies which have proven efficacy and but which has significantly different economical implications. Whether there's a clinically equivalent in patients with rheumatoid arthritis who have active disease despite methotrexate therapy. When considering the cost of the study, the triple therapy would cost about approximately $1,000 per year, but when compared to the biologics, it costs about 12 times more than that. And these drugs have been well tolerated by patients with treatment refractory disease, and all the drugs used in the trial are FDA approved and are used according to the recommended guidelines. So I think the first question is they have addressed a clearly focused issue in this trial. So was the assignment of patients to treatment randomized? It was done to avoid the accidental or intentional bias. And with regard to that, I would like to describe briefly about the methods of the study. The study design was a multi-center, randomized, double-blind, non-inferiority trial, which was conducted at 16 Veteran Affairs Hospital, 12 rheumatoid arthritis investigational network sites, and 8 Canadian medical centers. As I mentioned before, done from July 2007 to December 2010. And for the randomization, both stratification and blocking were employed. And it was done by the site to account to any regional differences in clinical practice. There had been 353 participants who are 18 years of age or older and who have met the criteria of 1987 ACR criteria for the rheumatoid arthritis and who had been receiving MTX at least doses of stable doses of at least 15 to 25 milligrams weekly dose at least for 12 weeks and should have a disease activity, the DAS28 score 4.4 or higher, and they should meet the inclusion criteria and should not have any exclusion criteria. With regard to the inclusion criteria, as I mentioned before, the above mentioned components as well as the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis should be made at the age of 16 or above that. And if the patients are receiving steroid, they should be on a stable dose, which should be less than 10 milligrams of prednisolone or equivalent, and should be on that for at least 2 weeks prior to the screening. And if the patients are using NSA, they must be on a stable doses for at least 1 week prior to the screening. And if the patient have taken the following drugs, the leflunomide, cyclophosphamide, gold, anakinra, azathioprine or penicillamide in combination with methotrexate, they must have stopped that at least 8 weeks prior to the randomization, as those drugs also can affect the results of the study. And with regard to that lab test, there are several hematological as well as the liver function and the renal function should be stable, like mentioned here. And all patients should have a capability to give informed consent and adhere to study visits. And they should be able to self-inject, or there should be a caregiver who could inject the subcutaneous injection. And they should have excluded TB as well. And with regard to exclusion criteria, previous intolerance to methotrexate, but that's unable to tolerate at a doses less than 10. And any sensitivity to study medications and previous treatment with triple therapy in combination, which had been given for longer than 4 weeks duration is excluded. And no bed or wheelchair-bound patients were included in the study. And also the previous treatment with TNF-alpha inhibitor for more than 5 weeks of therapy was also excluded. And there are other several exclusion criteria like chronic or acute infections, pregnant women, nursing women, women who have childbearing age, and history of diseases like multiple sclerosis, transverse myelitis, optic neuritis, and the congestive heart failure and active malignancy was also excluded. And the other condition like SLE or seronegative spondyloarthropathy, which could have a component of arthritis, also excluded from the study, but osteoarthritis is permitted. And so with regard to the question of was the assignment of patients to treatment randomized, randomization was done, and the study population setting and the randomization method was adequately described in this trial. And with regard to the question, were patients, healthcare workers, and study personnel blinded? They have used the quadruple masking with blinding of all the participants, care provider, investigator, and the outcome assessor as well. Were the groups similar at the start of the trial? With regard to the baseline characteristic like age, gender, the nationality, and the smoking status, and the positivity of the rheumatoid factor, as well as the baseline disease activity from the DAS28 and the concomitant medication, both groups were similar at the start of the study. Aside from the experimental intervention, were the groups treated equally? So this is the study design of this trial, where the patients were randomized for the 2 arms, and they have continued each arm for 24 weeks. And at the 24 weeks, they were assessed with the DAS28, whether there is improvement or not. The improvement was considered if there is a DAS28 has improved from 1.2 or more. If there is improvement, they will be continuing the same arm. If not, they will be switched to the other arm. And they will be continued in the blinded fashion for another 24 weeks. And at the end of the 48 weeks, they will be assessed again with the, for the primary outcome of DAS28. After 48 weeks, they will be continued, they will be not blinded, but they will be continued to be monitored until up to 82 weeks. This slide shows the drug doses they have used. For the triple therapy, they have used the sulfasalazine 1 gram daily for 6 weeks, then increased to 2 grams daily, hydroxychloroquine 4 milligram daily, and that patient group were given placebo subcutaneous injection weekly. And for the other group, the biologic group, they were given etanercept 50 milligrams subcutaneous with the placebo sulfasalazine and placebo hydroxychloroquine. And all patients continue to receive the baseline MTX at the same dose and the same route of administration. And they have all received the folic acid. And corticosteroids were given at a dose of less than 10 milligram. It was allowed if the patient has and it should be it should remain constant throughout the study if the steroids are given. And for the disease flares, the increases of oral steroid dose, again less than 10 milligram were allowed, and but they should not be given to a point 1 month before a evaluation point. And also 1 intra-articular steroid injection is allowed. That's again should not be given within the 6 weeks of the evaluation point. And NSAIDs were also allowed, and if they have started, they have encouraged to continue it throughout the study. And all the analgesics should be stopped before 12 hours prior to a joint assessment. And use of live vaccines are also not recommended during the study period. So aside from the experimental intervention, the both groups are treated equally. But all patients who entered the trial properly accounted for its conclusion. In assessment-wise, all patients were assessed every 6 weekly for the monitoring of the lab values and the adverse event. And at the time of enrollment and at 12 weeks, they were assessed with the health assessment questionnaire and the count of the joint count, tender joint count, and the pain was assessed. And again, at the time of enrollment and every 24 weeks, DAS28 and the Physician's Global Assessment, quality of life and functional surveys were administered and the radiographs were obtained. And so this summarizes the study group. You can see there is a loss to follow up in all groups after switching as well. In both terms, 44 people have switched for the other group at the 24 weeks because of the non-response. So, although there was 353 patients included in the study, only 309 patients were completed the 48-week assessment, and they are only included in the efficacy analysis. And all the analyses were done in the intention to treat basis, and per protocol analysis were done for the subgroup of patients who adhere to the study treatment, which is defined as at least they have taken the 80% of the prescribed study medication over the course of 48 weeks. And so, with regard to this question, were all the patients who entered the trial properly accounted for this conclusion? Actually, it's not happened in this trial. And with regard to the other broad issue, what are the results? With regard to that, there are several questions. What are the outcome measured? What is the primary outcome? And what are the results found for each outcome? And is there evidence of selective reporting? And with regard to the how precise the estimate of treatment done, what are the confidence limit and are they statistically significant? And the primary objective had been to determine whether these two successful treatment strategies with significantly different economical implications are clinically equivalent, which was measured by the percentage of patients who reach a low disease activity state, which is assessed by the reduction of DAS28 by 3.2 value. But although the primary objective had been that, they had to change the outcome at the outcome measure at the end of the 48 weeks because the originally due to the unexpectedly low enrollment rate, they had to change the primary outcome. They have assessed the decrease in the DAS28 of 1.2 or more rather than taking the less than 3.2 value. And with regard to the secondary objectives, those were to evaluate whether the radiographic progressions and whether the functional outcomes differ significantly between the two groups at the end of 48 weeks and the cost effectiveness of the two groups. For the secondary outcome measures, they have for the radiographic progression, they have used the standard PA X-rays of the hand and wrist and AP X-rays of the feet, which was assessed by the modified Sharp score, and they were obtained at particular time intervals and assessed independently by two trained readers who are unaware of the treatment the participants are currently receiving at the and also the duration of the treatment they have received at the time of assessment. And the mean score of the two readers' value was obtained. And the functional outcomes was assessed using the health assessment questionnaire, and the quality of life is also assessed using the health utility index score. And with regard to the statistical analysis of the results, the comparison between the two groups are done using the student t-test for the continuous measure and the chi-square test for the categorical measures. And the one-sided hypothesis was that triple therapy would not be inferior to the etanercept methotrexate therapy. And they have rejected the null hypothesis if the upper limit of the 95% confidence interval for the difference between the two groups at 48 weeks is less than 0.6. And the results of the study, with regard to the primary outcome, the difference between the groups in the mean SD change in the DAS28 from the baseline to 48 weeks had been 0.17 plus or minus 0.15, and which has a significant p-value of 0.002 for the non-inferiority. And both groups, there had been 44 patients, that means the percentage-wise 27%, and 26.7 patients were switched to the other arm. And both the group of participants who have switched had improvement in the DAS28 with the alternative therapy at the 48 weeks. That's again the p-value is significant for that. And this is depicted here. That's what I mentioned here. And this is the change of the baseline, change of the radiographic progression from baseline to the 48 weeks, which was not so significant between two groups. And with regard to the ACR response, with regard to the ACR 70 at 24 weeks, there had been a significant difference between two groups, but which was not shown at the 48 weeks. So with regard to my question, are the results of the study valid? Most of them were fulfilled, but actually I couldn't find any evidence of they have selectively reporting any outcomes as well. And lastly, I would like to consider which will the results of the study will help locally to us. Before that, I have found some limitations of the study, mainly the sample size. Initially, they have calculated the sample size as 450 with the power of 90% with a type 1 error of 5%. But before the study ended, and 1 year before the study ended, they have anticipated that they would not be able to recruit that amount. They have changed the sample size to 300 subjects, then the power will become 82% only. And the other problem was that 54% of the participants were men in both of the groups, usually which is not for the patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And there is some query whether men may have a better response to the treatment than women, but there was no significant data to suggest that sex is associated with the differential response to a particular therapy. And this study also had not shown any significantly difference improvement, but the data they have not shown. And the study showed a clear trend favoring a more rapid response in the biologics group. As I mentioned before, the ACR 70 response at 24 weeks was higher in the biologics group. So, will the results help locally? So, with regard to that, were the people included in this trial similar to our population? So, our population, when we consider the ethnicity, that's a difference between the two groups. And was the study and follow-up of appropriate duration for the disease state and intervention under review. So they have actually followed up for 48 weeks, which and in a blinded pattern and also later on as well. So I think they have adequately followed up the patients as well. And does the setting of the trial differ from our local setting? I'm not very sure about their setting, but I think should be equal to our setting where we are managing our patients as well. And could that same treatment be provided in our local setting? With regard to the TNF alpha, we don't have etanercept with us. We have the other TNF alpha inhibitors. So do the other the other TNF alpha and the etanercept act similarly? We don't know. And so the benefits of this treatment outweighs the risk and the cost. Usually the risk what they have mentioned is the well-known, the infection is the main risk they have mentioned, which is also similar with both groups. So my main query was whether the experiment drug, the etanercept, similar to the other TNF inhibitors and the other TNF inhibitor and over the other biological DMARDs. That concludes my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Yes, please. Patients are working.
Wait a little. Start off. Then it's that well. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the College of Specialists for Rheumatology and Education, we welcome you all for our August clinical presentation. Thank you to our sponsors, Medica, who are continuing doing this program, us. And also a bit of a breaking news before starting. College will be having our annual sessions on 5th and 6th of December, the Shangri-La, Colombo. Keep those 2 days free, planning for a session. So, for today's first presentation is on clinical approach to back pain by Dr. Dilrukshit Ennapo, consultant rheumatologist from District University.
Thank you, sir. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And as the topic mentions, what I'm going to talk to you today is a clinical approach to back pain, particularly low back pain. So, what do you mean by back? It spans from the occiput to the coccyx and involves the gluteal region and is composed of sturdy bones and powerful muscles. It is built to provide stability, but at the same time, it allows flexibility. So the seemingly incompatible functions of support and movement are provided by this structure, thus making it vulnerable to injury. Why did we choose a common topic. Why low back pain? Because it is the second most commonest reason for seeking medical help presented to the general practitioners, second only to respiratory conditions. More than 80% of adults experience low back pain at some point of their lives, and it is a leading cause of disability among the economically productive age group of a society. The common cause of missed working days due to this condition, thus indirectly affecting the economy. Let us quickly look at a few patients. Patient number 1 is a 43-year-old male who presented with severe low back pain for past 3 months duration. His sleep was disturbed. He presented with constitutional symptoms of loss of weight, loss of appetite. On investigation, had very high ESR of 120, anemia, serum creatinine was high, renal functions deranged. His pelvic X-ray showed lytic lesions. The blood picture showed anemia and increased ruler formation. Serum protein electrophoresis showed an M-band pattern. The bone marrow biopsy confirmed multiple myeloma. Patient number 2 is a 38-year-old male again, who presented with insidious onset low back pain, buttock pain, with morning stiffness of the spine with reduced range of motion. There was also a left knee pain and swelling along with Achilles tendinitis. So his Achilles tendon that looked like something like this. And investigations, he had marginally elevated here. ESR, rheumatoid factor was negative. His sacroiliac joint X-ray looked like this. A diagnosis of spondyloarthritis or other ankylosing spondylitis was. Patient number 3, 45-year-old manual laborer who presented with sudden onset severe low back pain, shooting pain down the right lower limb. His sphincters were intact. His SLRT was positive at 60 degrees. There was no neurological deficit. Diagnosis of sciatica caused by nerve root irritation. So you see all 3 patients presented with low back pain. Now, back, I told you, is a structure with bones and muscles. So the pain could arise from any structure, muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, passage joints, nerve impingement, herniated discs. But in 85%, there's no clear localization. Common pathoanatomical conditions of the lumbar spine, if you see, there you can have displacement of vertebrae over one another, a condition called spondylolisthesis. There might be defects of pars interarticularis, condition called spondylolysis. There might be herniation of discs, thus compressing nerves or nerve roots, and there could be canal stenosis due to hypertrophy of ligamentum flavum or degenerative changes of the passage. The pain due to with its duration can be classified or divided into acute pain, which lasts 4 to 6 weeks or less than 6 weeks, subacute pain, which ranges from 6 to 12 weeks, and chronic pain, which persists more than 12. Now, when we consider low back pain, we were presenting patients and all that. Now, what are the causes? You will see 97% of patients with low back pain are due to mechanical causes, while non-mechanical causes account for 1%, and back pain due to visceral disease will account for the rest 2%. What triggers mechanical? We will mainly be talking about mechanical low back pain because that is the most commonest, and what triggers this pain is maybe sitting or standing for long periods, poor sitting or sleeping postures or working postures, wrong weightlifting techniques and carrying heavy weights, extreme movements of the spine, obesity, lack of exercise, and sometimes psychological factors could contribute. For example, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and social issues also may play a key role, like disability compensation or job satisfaction. So out of the mechanical causes, muscular strains of the muscles and ligaments account for 70%, while degenerative disc facets will account for around 10%, herniated discs, spinal stenosis, osteoporotic compression fractures, spondylolisthesis, and traumatic fractures also. What are the non-medical causes? Now, we emphasize a lot on these non-mechanical causes. Neoplasia will account for around 0.7%, multiple myeloma, metastasis, spinal cord tumors. Inflammatory arthritis only accounts for 0.3%, although that is our specialty. Ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, reiters could account for the inflammatory back pains. And infections like osteomyelitis, septic discitis, as well as metabolic diseases account for the rest. Several diseases that can give rise to back pain would be pelvic organ diseases, pelvic inflammatory disease, renal diseases, nephrolithiasis, aortic aneurysms, and also gastrointestinal diseases like pancreatitis or cholecystitis. So when you encounter a patient, as in any other patient, history is of utmost importance. You have to elaborate on the pain, the onset, is it acute versus insidious, the character of the pain, location, and whether there's radiation, the duration of symptoms, intensity, associated symptoms of stiffness, whether the sphincters are involved, aggravating and relieving factors, and also a systemic review is important to look for constitutional symptoms and urinary and bowel habits as well. The same goes for medical, surgical history. You have to ask about previous back pain, whether there have been trauma previously, history of malignancy, and whether the patient has been on corticosteroids, for example, osteoporotic fractures, and whether the patients are on immunosuppressants for risk of infection. Family history of back pain, skin conditions, for example, psoriasis, or family history of spondyloarthritis. The social history is also very important, like stressors and occupation. When you go through the history, you look at the red flag signs, weight loss, fever, night sweats, history of malignancy, acute onset in the elderly, neurological disturbances, sphincter disturbance, immune suppression, infection, and when there is nocturnal pain or bone pain, these are the red flag signs that you have to be aware of. When you examine the general examinations, you look at the patient. When the patient walks in, what is the posture? Is the patient comfortable? How does the patient sit? And then go to the examination of the back problem. As in any rheumatological examination, you look, you feel, move, and do the special. What you look from side, you evaluate the spinal curvatures. From behind, note any scars, swellings, erythema, and shape of the spine. You feel for the spinous processes, whether there are any step-offs, for tenderness, and also muscle spasm. And you examine the sigmoid joint as well. Next comes the movement of the spine, the flexion, extension, rotation, and lateral flexion. After doing this, we can get on to the special test, the straight leg raising test. How do you do the test? Keep the patient supine, have the patient completely relax, cup the heel, and then gently raise the leg. Sciatic pain usually occurs around 30 to 70 degrees of lifting the leg, and it is aggravated by dorsiflexion of the foot and relieved by flexion of the knee. There is crossed straight leg raising, that is where you raise the leg, the opposite leg, and symptoms are produced in the leg concerned, lower limb concerned, that is very specific for herniated discs. Then other special tests like Schober's test, modified Schober's test, can be performed, and then you go getting on to the neurologic examination. You look for any sudden anesthesia, look for any motor deficits, ankle and the great toe dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, ankle reflexes, and any nerve root involvement by way of pain distribution. L4 will distribute like this, and the motor weakness would be mainly in the extension of quadriceps. Screening examination, you can ask the patient to squat and rise, and knee jerks might be diminished. L5 root is mainly at the back. Pain radiates down the back of the lower leg, and dorsiflexion of the great toe and foot is weak. You can ask the patient to walk on the heels, and S1 is mainly again at the back, but here the plantar flexion of the great toe and foot would be. So how do you investigate a patient with back pain? Before we get on to this, remember, guidelines say the clinicians should not routinely obtain imaging or other diagnostic investigations in patients with non-specific low back pain if it lasts, or acute lower back pain that is lasts less than 4 weeks. What are the blood investigations? The general basic investigations, your ESRs, DRPs to look for inflammation. Full blood count again might show anemia as in our case, or any other evidence of inflammatory arthritis. HLA-B27 specific for ankylosing spondylitis. The calciums, phosphates, alkaline phosphatase for metabolic bone diseases. Acid phosphatase, prostate-specific antigens for malignancies, and serum protein electrophoresis for multiple myeloma. Imaging, do perform X-rays if fever or there's unexplained weight loss or history of cancer, neurological deficit. If they are in the extremes of age, very low or high age, trauma, immunosuppression, prolonged steroid use, or if they have any features of sepsis. Usually you do the AP and lateral lumbar spine X-rays, and if you are suspecting or expecting to find spondylolisthesis, then oblique X-rays are needed. CTs and MRIs would add more to the findings. So they are more sensitive in detection of infection, cancer. Imaging of herniated discs would be, and spinal stenosis, these cannot be appreciated with X-rays, can be appreciated with the MRIs. So MRIs are better than CTs for detection of infection, metastasis, and rare tumors as well. But beware, often incidental findings could also be there without the patient having any symptoms. Bone scan is also available to investigate these patients. If you sort of look for a flow chart in the investigation or approach to the patient, patients presenting with low back pain, you look for presence of sciatica. If it is not present, whether it's a simple back pain, improve the treatment, you stop the treatment, no signs of systemic disease, no history of cancer, then there's no sciatica, complicated back pain without radiculopathy. Consider if there's a abnormal review, then you have to consider further investigations. If there's radiculopathy, then you may have to do the plain X-rays, ESRs, and further investigations, if not improved. Management is our aim is to relieve pain, improve the quality of life, and treat the underlying cause. When these patients are treated, it is recommended that they return rapidly to normal activities with neither bed rest nor strenuous exercises during the acute period. Bed rest does not improve and it delays recovery. In rehabilitation of patients with mechanical back pain, physical therapy is very important, plays a big role, and physical therapy could be given in these 6. That is control of pain and inflammatory processes. For this, we can use ice pack, ice therapy, TENS therapy, etc. Restoration of joint range of motion and soft tissue extensibility. Third would be improvement of muscle strength and endurance, coordination retraining, improvement of general cardiovascular condition, and maintenance exercise programs. Along with this physical therapy, we can give medical therapy, that is to relieve the pain, simple analgesics, acetaminophen, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, topical analgesics, muscle relaxants, opioids, corticosteroids, antidepressants, and anticonvulsants could be used to treat the pain. What is the prognosis of mechanical back pain? If they present early, within 3 days of symptom onset, more than 90% of them will recover within 2 weeks. Out of the others, also 35% will recover at 1 month, 85% at 3 months, and 95% at 6 months. However, recurrences are common. At 1 year, 62%, and at 2 years, 80%. 1 or more recurrences occur. Then we'll have to look into the cause of the pain, whether there's recurrent back injuries, whether it is due to the natural process, inevitable process of natural aging, or there's continued pathological process. Sometimes you might even have to consider somatization. Surgical therapy is only effective for sciatica, spinal stenosis, or spondylolisthesis. We think of herniated intervertebral disc, the general measures, but early treatment. But if the pain is severe and there is neurological deficit, we might have to go for MRIs and consider surgery. Spinal stenosis are again the general measures, and surgical interventions like decompressive laminectomy, spinal fusions, plus decompression if there is additional spondylolisthesis. However, we have to remember that symptoms often recur even after successful surgery. Now, we were mainly discussing about the mechanical back pain. What about inflammatory low back pain? Though it is a very small percentage of the general back pain population, that is also important. So, spondyloarthritis refers to inflammatory changes involving the spinal and spinal joints, the sacroiliac joints. Many times have may sometimes have peripheral arthritis without spinal symptoms as well. There is absence of rheumatoid factor, and it includes ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, reactive arthritis, centropathic-associated arthritis, and undifferentiated spondyloarthritis. The clinical characteristics of peripheral arthritis predominantly of the lower limbs, which is asymmetrical, radiographic sacroiliitis, enthesitis, extra-articular features of the present anterior realities of articulations. There is tendency to aggregate in the families, and HLA-B27 association could also be seen. So, X-ray changes, Achilles tendinitis. How do you differentiate inflammatory from mechanical back pain? An inflammatory back pain, usually in the young. Mechanical could occur at any age. Insidious onset in inflammatory, more than 3 months duration, more than 60 minutes of stiffness, usually in the morning. Nocturnal pain, the pain improves with activity. There's sacroiliac tenderness, loss of mobility in all planes, and unlikely to have neurological deficit. Mechanical, as opposed to the inflammatory, will have acute onset, less than 4 weeks duration, less than 30 minutes of morning stiffness, no nocturnal pain, worse with activity, and Usually the flexion is affected and there might be possible neurological deficits. So what are the take-home messages? Majority does not, of these patients presenting with low back pain, there's no serious underlying condition. 70 to 80% of acute low back pain will resolve by 1 month. To advise these patients to return back to normal activities as soon as possible and bed rest is discouraged. Remember not to X-ray routinely or do the other investigations. And refer to relevant specialties where there is no improvement after weeks. Serious spinal pathology is suspected or there's evidence of Corday-Quadra syndrome or progressive neurological disease. Thank you.
Okay. One thing we see is sometimes that pain comes
Yes.
this include
Well, osteoporosis per se will not cause the back pain unless there is a fracture. So that's why I think I that. But yes, patients do come with X-rays and they say I have pain. So it might not be the X-ray that we want. I don't think we have any particular program as such, but in all the units that we are working, the physiotherapy departments, we refer the patients, they will be able to, not only physiotherapy, occupational therapy is also very important. So these patients who are having back pain can be referred for all the strengthening exercises, back discipline, and also advise on occupational the postures assessment and advise on that.
First, you have to make sure that and then general principle is strengthen.
Yes. For muscle strengthening. Yes.
Practice, and there is a possibility.
Yes.
Well,